My name is Hazel and I'm 29 years old. Growing up as the family disappointment isn't easy, especially when you're constantly compared to a brother everyone calls brilliant. Last month at our parents' anniversary dinner, Jackson called me the dumb one only fit to be a worker in front of our entire family. I stayed quiet and left early fighting back tears. What he didn't know was that hours later, a mysterious stranger would hand me an envelope containing something that would make my golden boy brother tremble. Life has a funny way of revealing who you really are. If you've ever been underestimated by those who should believe in you, most leave a comment below. Let me take you on my journey from family afterthought to the moment everything changed. Before I dive in, tell me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like you're living in someone else's shadow. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in Brookline, a leafy suburb of Boston, in a household where intelligence wasn't just valued, it was the currency we traded in. Both my parents were university professors, with impressive credentials hanging on our hallway wall. Dad taught theoretical physics at MIT, and Mom was a respected literature professor at Boston University. Their world revolved around academic achievement, published papers, and intellectual debates that filled our dinner table conversations. Then there was my brother Jackson, 3 years older than me and seemingly born with a brain that absorbed everything effortlessly. He was reading at age 3, solving complex math equations by 5, and skipping grades by middle school. His bedroom shelves groaned under the weight of academic trophies, science fair ribbons, and perfect report cards. He wasn't just smart, he was extraordinary, and everyone knew it. Jackson is going to change the world someday. Teachers would say, their eyes gleaming with that special excitement reserved for truly exceptional students. My parents basked in his achievements collecting newspaper clippings when he won the state mathematics championship, and later when he became the youngest member of the National Physics Olympiad team. Jackson wasn't terrible about it, at least not when we were very young. He would try to help me with homework sometimes, but his explanations moved too quickly, jumping steps that seemed obvious to him, but were chasms of confusion for me. "It's simple, Hazel," he'd say, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion at my inability to follow. "You just need to focus more." Focus wasn't my problem. My brain simply worked differently. While Jackson excelled at linear logical thinking, I saw the world in patterns, colors, and connections that didn't translate well to standardized tests or traditional classroom settings. I struggled with reading the letters, would sometimes jumble together or seem to float off the page. Math problems felt like trying to hold sand in my fingers. I could understand concepts momentarily before they slipped away again. By third grade, the comparison became constant. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became the refrain of my childhood, sometimes spoken aloud, sometimes just implied in disappointed sighs and concerned teacher conferences. My parents tried different approaches to fix me tutors' strict study schedules, even a brief and unsuccessful attempt at medication for what one doctor suspected might be ADHD. Nothing worked, at least not in the way they hoped. My grades remained stubbornly average, occasionally dipping into concerning territory with subjects like algebra and chemistry. What none of them noticed was how I came alive in art class, or how I could redesign my entire bedroom with perfectly balanced colors and spaces when I was just 12. They didn't see the intricate drawings I created, or how I could visualize three-dimensional objects from every angle in my mind. These talents weren't measurable by their standards, so they remained invisible. High school crystallized our family roles completely. Jackson graduated as valedictorian with a full scholarship to Harvard. I sat in the audience with my parents, watching him deliver a speech about pushing beyond limitations, while knowing I was barely going to graduate the following year. The night of my high school graduation, which Jackson flew home from college to attend, my parents hosted a small gathering. They tried to seem proud, but their congratulations felt hollow compared to the celebration they'd thrown for Jackson. Later that evening, I overheard my mother talking to her sister in the kitchen. "We've accepted that Hazel just isn't academic," she said, her voice tinged with what sounded like defeat. "We're hoping she'll find some kind of steady job. Maybe administrative work. She's good with people, at least." That night, I made a decision that shocked my family. I announced I wouldn't be attending college, not even the community college they'd reluctantly researched for me. Instead, I would move to New York and work. This is a terrible mistake. My father said, his disappointment palpable. Without a degree, you'll never amount to anything significant. Jackson tried to mediate in his logical way. Statistically speaking, your earning potential drops by 40% without a bachelor's degree. It's just not practical, Hazel. But for the first time, I stood firm. I needed to escape their expectations and find my own path, even if that path seemed hopelessly inferior to them. 2 months after graduation, with $3,000 saved from my part-time job at a local coffee shop, I boarded a bus to New York City, carrying everything I owned in 2 suitcases and a backpack full of art supplies. My parents drove me to the bus station, but remained in the car while I purchased my ticket. As I turned to say goodbye, my mother rolled down the window. "When this doesn't work out," she said, "you can always come home." It wasn't encouragement, it was a prediction of failure. I nodded, unable to form words around the lump in my throat, and walked away with my shoulders straight, determined to prove them wrong, or at least find a version of success I could live with. Jackson sent me a text as the bus pulled away. "They mean well, they just worry. Call if you need anything." It was kind, but even his kindness carried the implicit understanding that I would inevitably need his help. New York City hit me like a tidal wave, overwhelming, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. I'd never lived anywhere but our quiet suburban neighborhood. And suddenly I was navigating subway systems, dodging aggressive taxi drivers, and trying not to look too obviously like a tourist as I wandered through Manhattan with wide eyes. My first apartment was actually just a room in a shared Brooklyn walk-up, with 3 roommates I found on Craigslist. The room was tiny, barely fitting a twin mattress and a small desk, but it was mine, the first space that belonged wholly to me, without comparisons or expectations hanging in the air. Finding work proved harder than I'd anticipated. Without a degree, my options were limited. I started with a waitressing job at a diner in Williamsburg, working 12-hour shifts that left my feet aching and my clothes smelling like grease. The tips were decent, but the work was exhausting, and I felt the ghost of my parents' disappointment following me as I refilled coffee cups and memorized breakfast specials. 3 months into my New York experiment, I spotted a help wanted sign in the window of a small design agency in Chelsea. On impulse, I walked in and asked about the position. The receptionist looked me up and down skeptically. "It's just an office assistant role," she said. "Filing phones, coffee runs, nothing glamorous." "That's fine," I replied. "I'm reliable. I learn quickly, and I'm good with people." By some miracle, they hired me. Griffin and Stone Design was a boutique firm with about 15 employees specializing in branding and packaging design for small businesses. The pay was barely better than waitressing, but the hours were regular, and I was surrounded by creative work that fascinated me. I threw myself into the job, arriving early to organize the office and staying late to make sure everything was prepared for the next day. I learned how to manage the temperamental coffee machine, memorized everyone's lunch preferences, and became an expert at soothing frustrated clients waiting on the phone. Most importantly, I watched. During quiet moments, I'd observe the designers at work, trying to understand their process. I noticed how they talked about color psychology and spatial relationships concepts that resonated deeply with how I naturally saw the world. At night, I'd return to my tiny room and practice with free design software I'd downloaded, attempting to recreate the projects I'd seen during the day. 4 months into the job, I met Sarah. She was a new creative director. The firm had hired a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and an impressive portfolio from major agencies in London and Tokyo. Unlike the other designers who barely noticed me, Sarah would stop by the front desk and chat. One evening, as I was staying late to organize the supply closet, she caught me sketching a redesign of a client's logo on a scrap piece of paper. "Did you do that?" she asked, picking up my drawing without asking. My face flushed with embarrassment. "It's nothing, just doodling." She studied it silently, her expression unreadable. "This is actually better than what the team presented yesterday. The balance is more harmonious, and you've solved the readability issue we were struggling with." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but her face remained serious. "Do you have more of these?" she asked. That night, Sarah stayed 2 hours past closing, looking through a folder of sketches and digital attempts I'd been too embarrassed to show anyone. Instead of dismissing my lack of formal training, she asked questions about my process and how I approached visual problems. "You have a natural eye," she said finally. "Raw talent. But talent only goes so far without skills and knowledge to back it up." The next day, Sarah brought me a stack of design books from her personal collection and installed a professional design software suite on my work computer. "Learn this, practice after hours. I'll check your progress weekly." Thus began my real education. While I continued answering phones and scheduling meetings during the day, my evenings transformed into an intensive design boot camp under Sarah's guidance. She was a demanding teacher, often making me redo projects multiple times until they met her standards, but she never once suggested I wasn't capable of learning. "You think differently," she told me one night after I'd presented a particularly unusual solution to a branding problem. "Most designers follow patterns they've learned. You invent new ones because you haven't been taught the right way to think. That's valuable." After a year of this unofficial apprenticeship, Sarah convinced the firm's partners to let me assist on actual client work. My first professional design, a package for an artisanal soap company, was approved by the client without a single revision. The creative team was surprised. Sarah wasn't. Gradually, I transitioned from office assistant to junior designer, though my salary didn't reflect the change for another 6 months. I didn't mind. For the first time in my life, I was being valued for how my mind worked, not punished for how it didn't. Meanwhile, Jackson completed his undergraduate degree in 3 years instead of 4, and immediately entered a prestigious PhD program in computational neuroscience. My parents sent me newspaper clippings about his fellowship awards and research grants. I taped them to my refrigerator not out of jealousy, but as reminders of the path I didn't want. During one of our infrequent phone calls, my mother asked if I was still answering phones at that art place. I didn't correct her. Somehow explaining my growing design skills felt like inviting comparison again, and I was finally free of that burden. Let them think I was just getting by. In my own way, I was thriving. By my 3rd year in New York, I had moved to a slightly better apartment in Astoria, built a modest portfolio of design work, and started taking on small freelance projects that Sarah referred to me. I was teaching myself coding basics to better understand digital design and experimenting with user interface concepts that had been floating around my mind. All this time, a question had been forming. Why was traditional education so inaccessible to people like me? Why did learning have to follow such rigid structures? These questions would eventually lead me to the most important project of my life, but I wasn't there yet. The idea came to me on a rainy Tuesday evening as I struggled to follow a complicated online tutorial about animation principles. The instructor moved quickly, presenting information in a linear, text-heavy format that made my brain shut down after 20 minutes. I found myself wishing I could reorganize the information visually, breaking it into patterns that made sense to my mind. That's when it hit me. What if there was a design tool specifically created for people with non-traditional learning styles? An app that could adapt to different cognitive approaches, presenting information and tools in ways that matched how various brains naturally processed visual information. I began sketching concepts that night, staying up until 4 a.m. as ideas poured out of me. By morning, I had the basic framework for what I called Prism, a design application that could change its interface workflow, and even color scheme based on the user's cognitive style. For the next 3 months, I obsessively developed the concept, creating detailed wireframes and mock-ups during every free moment. I researched cognitive styles, learning disabilities, and emerging theories about neurodiversity. I interviewed friends who struggled with traditional learning environments, gathering insights about what would have helped them. The more I worked on Prism, the more convinced I became that this wasn't just a good idea, it was important. It could change how people learned creative skills, making design accessible to minds that had been systematically excluded. There was just one enormous problem: I wasn't a developer. I could design the perfect interface, but I couldn't build it myself. Enter Max Weber. I met him at a tech meetup Sarah had encouraged me to attend, despite my protest that I'd be the least technical person there. Max was a developer who specialized in educational software with shaggy brown hair and a tendency to interrupt himself mid-sentence when a new idea struck. When I nervously showed him my Prism concept during a coffee break, his eyes widened. "This is actually brilliant," he said, flipping through my sketches. "I've never seen anyone approach adaptive interfaces quite like this. The cognitive framework is really solid." For the first time, I revealed my full vision for the app, including features I hadn't dared write down before because they seemed too ambitious. Max didn't laugh or dismiss any of it. Instead, he pulled out his laptop and began typing notes furiously. "I want to help build this," he said simply. Over the next 2 years, Max and I worked on Prism whenever we could, evenings, weekends, early mornings before our day jobs. We operated out of coffee shops in my tiny apartment, gradually building a functional prototype. The process wasn't smooth. We ran into technical obstacles that sometimes took weeks to solve. We argued over features and priorities. Twice, we nearly abandoned the project when the challenges seemed insurmountable. The worst moment came when we realized we needed substantial funding to complete development. Max had already invested hundreds of unpaid hours, and my savings were completely depleted. I had been selling pieces of jewelry my grandmother left me one item at a time to fund specific development milestones. "Maybe we should look for investors," Max suggested during a particularly discouraging moment. But seeking investment would mean explaining my vision to rooms full of people who thought like my family, people who valued traditional credentials and linear thinking. The thought paralyzed me with anxiety. "Not yet," I insisted. "Let's get it closer to complete first." I sold my grandmother's last piece, a vintage gold watch, to pay for the final development push. We worked 16-hour days for 2 weeks straight, surviving on coffee and takeout, determined to finish a presentable version of the prototype. When it was done, we had something that wasn't perfect, but was functional enough to demonstrate the core concept. Users could take a simple cognitive style assessment, and the entire interface would reconfigure to match their thinking patterns. Visual learners got an image-forward interface. Sequential thinkers received step-by-step guidance. Pattern recognizers like me got a holistic workspace that showed connections between tools and outcomes. "Now what?" Max asked when we'd fixed the last critical bug. I had been secretly researching design competitions for months, looking for one that might appreciate our unconventional approach. The Morningside Innovation Challenge seemed perfect. It focused on accessibility and educational technology, with a substantial cash prize and development support for the winner. "We submit it anonymously," I said, showing Max the competition website. "No names, no backgrounds, just the product and the vision." Max looked skeptical. "Why anonymously? Your story is compelling. It might help our chances." I couldn't fully articulate my reasons, but they were bound up in years of being told my brain wasn't good enough. If Prism was going to be judged, I wanted it judged purely on its merits, not influenced by my lack of credentials or my family history. "Trust me," I said. "This is how it needs to be." We submitted our entry 3 days before the deadline, using only the project name and a brief developer statement that revealed nothing personal about either of us. Then came the hardest part: waiting. A week before the announcement date, my mother called to remind me about their upcoming anniversary dinner. It had been almost a year since I'd visited Boston, and despite my reservations, I knew I should go. Family obligations didn't disappear just because I'd moved away. "Jackson will be there," she added, as though that were the greatest incentive imaginable. "He's bringing his new fiancée. She's just received a research fellowship at Harvard Medical School." Of course she had. "I'll be there," I promised, already dreading the event. The timing was unfortunate. The competition results would be announced the day after the dinner, and I'd be in Boston rather than New York. Max promised to call me the moment he heard anything. As I packed for the trip, I felt a strange sense of foreboding mixed with something else, a quiet confidence I'd never experienced before. For the first time, I was returning home with a secret that would have astounded my family if only I could tell them about it. The anniversary dinner was held at an upscale restaurant in Cambridge that my parents had been frequenting since before I was born. The maitre d' greeted them by name and led us to a private room where extended family members were already gathering: aunts, uncles, cousins, and a few of my parents' closest academic friends. Jackson arrived fashionably late with Audrey, his fiancée. She was exactly as I'd imagined: tall, poised, with intelligent eyes behind designer glasses, and the confident bearing of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. They made a striking couple as they moved through the room, accepting congratulations on their engagement. I hung back near the bar nursing a glass of wine and exchanging pleasantries with relatives who seemed surprised I'd made it this long in New York without crawling back home. My Aunt Patricia patted my hand condescendingly when I mentioned I was working in design. "It's good you found something creative," she said. "Not everyone is cut out for academic rigor." Once seated for dinner, the conversation predictably centered around Jackson's recent achievements. He had just published a groundbreaking paper on neural network adaptability in the Journal of Computational Neuroscience and was being courted for a prestigious research position. "The practical applications are extraordinary," he explained, warming to his subject as the table listened raptly. "We're developing algorithms that could revolutionize how computers process information, potentially mimicking the brain's ability to recognize patterns and adapt to different types of data." I nearly choked on my water. He was describing something remarkably similar to the core technology of Prism, though approaching it from a theoretical rather than practical angle. "The biggest challenge," he continued, "is creating interfaces that can truly adapt to different cognitive styles. The theory is solid, but implementation is proving difficult." My uncle turned to me, perhaps noticing my sudden attention. "And what about you, Hazel, still doing graphic design?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Hazel's working at a creative agency in New York. She makes their office run smoothly." I opened my mouth to correct her. I hadn't been an office assistant for years, but Jackson spoke first. "Not everyone needs to chase academic dragons," he said in what he probably thought was a supportive tone. "The world needs all kinds of contributions." Something in his condescension sparked a rare courage in me. "Actually, I'm working on some interesting projects involving adaptive interface design. It's similar to what you're describing, Jackson, but from a user-centered perspective." The table fell silent momentarily before Jackson let out a short laugh. "Interface design is a bit different from neural network architecture, Hazel. What I'm describing involves complex computational models based on neuroscience. It's not really the same as making pretty buttons for websites." A few people chuckled. My father looked embarrassed, as though I'd tried to compare finger painting to quantum physics. "There's overlap in the cognitive theory," I persisted. "Different minds process visual information in different ways. If technology could adapt to those differences—" Hazel Jackson interrupted, his tone now carrying the familiar weight of brotherly patience I'd heard all my life. "I understand you're interested in this stuff, but there's a reason my team has 6 PhDs working on this problem. It's incredibly complex." I fell silent, the familiar feeling of intellectual inadequacy washing over me. The conversation moved on to Audrey's research, then to my parents' sabbatical plans. I picked at my food, feeling increasingly invisible as the evening progressed. During dessert, my cousin asked Jackson about his team's timeline for developing practical applications of their research. "Honestly, we're still years away," he admitted. "The theoretical framework is sound, but translating it into functional technology requires expertise we're still developing." "Maybe Hazel could help," my aunt joked, "with her user-centered perspective." The table erupted in polite laughter. I forced a smile, but Jackson didn't even bother with that pretense. "Let's be honest," he said, swirling his scotch. "Hazel's the dumb one. She's only fit to be a worker, not a thinker. We've all known it since we were kids." The laughter died instantly. My mother gasped softly, and my father looked down at his plate. Even Jackson seemed surprised by his own words, a flush spreading across his face. "I didn't mean—" he started, but I was already standing up. "Excuse me," I said quietly, placing my napkin beside my half-eaten chocolate mousse. "I need some air." I walked out of the restaurant without looking back, the cool Boston evening air a relief against my burning cheeks. No one followed me. Of course not. They were probably all just embarrassed by Jackson's bluntness, not by the sentiment itself, which had always been our family's unspoken truth. I wandered through familiar streets, eventually finding myself at a small park where I used to sketch as a teenager. Sitting on a bench, I checked my phone. It was just past 10, and there was a message from Max. "Still no word on the competition. Try to enjoy your family time." Family time. The phrase seemed almost comical now. I considered taking the first train back to New York in the morning, skipping the brunch my parents had planned. But something kept me there, sitting in the dark, replaying Jackson's words and all the years of similar moments that had shaped my self-perception. For the first time, I wondered if the problem had never been me. Maybe the real failure was a system that only recognized one kind of intelligence, one path to success. Maybe my family's inability to see my value wasn't evidence of my inadequacy, but of their limited vision. As this thought settled over me, I felt a strange sense of peace. Tomorrow, win or lose the competition, I would know that I had created something meaningful, something that might help others like me. And that knowledge was enough. I slept fitfully in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by remnants of a life I'd outgrown, faded posters, participation ribbons, the only kind I ever earned, and bookshelves filled with volumes I had struggled to read. I woke early before anyone else in the house and decided to find a cafe where I could gather my thoughts before facing my family again. The coffee shop on the corner of Maple and Elm had been renovated since my last visit, transformed from a cozy local joint into a sleek minimalist space with industrial lighting and uncomfortable-looking metal chairs. I ordered a latte and found a quiet corner table, pulling out my sketchbook more for comfort than with any real intention to draw. My phone vibrated with a text from Max. "No news yet. Announcement supposed to be at 2 p.m. I checked the time, just past 8. 6 more hours of uncertainty. The coffee shop gradually filled with morning customers, students with laptops, professionals grabbing to-go orders, mothers with strollers meeting for early playdates. I sketched idly, letting the ambient noise wash over me, trying not to think about last night's dinner or the competition results. At 9:37 a.m., a woman entered the cafe and ordered a black coffee. There was nothing particularly notable about this, except that she kept glancing in my direction while waiting for her drink. I assumed she was looking at someone behind me until she approached my table directly. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Hazel Bennett?" I looked up, startled. The woman appeared to be in her early 50s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and sharp, observant eyes. Her charcoal gray suit screamed expensive tailoring. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Do I know you?" She smiled and extended her hand. "Elena Williams. I'm the head judge for the Morningside Innovation Challenge." My heart stopped. I stared at her outstretched hand for several seconds before remembering to shake it. "How did you find you?" She smiled. "It wasn't easy. Your submission was anonymous, but there were enough breadcrumbs in the development documentation. The IP address, certain timestamps. My team is thorough." Elena sat down without waiting for an invitation, placing her coffee on the table between us. "You're probably wondering why I'm here in person rather than sending an email or making a call." I nodded, unable to find my voice. "2 reasons," she said, reaching into her briefcase. "First, the Morningside Challenge has never had an entry quite like Prism. The judges were divided. Some thought it was revolutionary. Others considered it too unconventional." She paused, studying my face. I found myself curious about the mind behind it. She withdrew a sealed envelope and placed it on the table. "And second, I wanted to deliver this personally." The envelope was cream-colored and heavy with the Morningside Innovation logo embossed in silver on the front. My name was handwritten across the center in elegant cursive. "This is the official notification of the competition results," Elena explained. "Normally sent by courier, but as I said, this case was special." I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. "Special how?" Elena's expression softened slightly. "Your application was extraordinary. It showed a kind of intelligence rarely seen in technical submissions, a holistic, interconnected approach to problem solving that most engineers can't conceive of, let alone execute." Her words echoed in my mind, colliding with Jackson's from the previous night. "Hazel's the dumb one." "I don't understand why you'd come all this way," I said. Elena leaned forward slightly. "Because I recognize something in your work. You see, I'm dyslexic. I struggled through traditional education despite having an IQ that tested off the charts. For years, I was the underachiever in my family of academics." The parallel to my own life was so striking that I felt goosebumps rising on my arms. "What you've designed with Prism," she continued, "is exactly what I needed 30 years ago. A tool that adapts to different brains rather than forcing different brains to adapt to it. That's not just good design, it's revolutionary thinking." She nudged the envelope closer to me. "Open it." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and removed several pages of official documentation. My eyes landed immediately on the first sentence of the letter. Congratulations to Hazel Bennett and Max Weber, whose project Prism has been awarded first prize in the 2023 Morningside Innovation Challenge. I looked up at Elena, certain I had misread. First prize, I whispered. She nodded. Unanimously, once I explained the significance of what you'd created. The prize includes $1 million in development funding and a 2-year mentorship program, with industry leaders including me if you'd like. My company Adaptive Systems would be interested in discussing partnership opportunities. The room seemed to tilt slightly. $1 million, mentorship, partnership. The words floated around me too enormous to fully comprehend. There's more, Elena said. We'd like you to present Prism at the International Design Conference next week in San Francisco. It's the largest gathering of UX designers and developers in the world. I must have looked overwhelmed, because Elena reached across the table and gently took my hand. Hazel, what you've created matters. It's going to change things for people like us. People whose intelligence doesn't fit neatly into conventional boxes. As her words sank in, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Max. I showed Elena the screen. You should take that, she said with a smile. Your partner deserves to hear the news too. I answered the call, putting it on speaker. Hazel. Max's voice was breathless with excitement. I just got the most bizarre email from the Morningside Challenge. They say we won, but that can't... It's true, I interrupted. We won, Max. First prize. His whoop of joy was so loud that several people in the cafe turned to look. Elena laughed, a warm, genuine sound that somehow made the moment real for me in a way the letter hadn't. There's someone here you should meet, I said, turning the phone toward Elena. This is Elena Williams, head judge, and apparently our new mentor. After a brief, excited conversation with Max, I ended the call and sat back, still processing everything. What happens now? I asked. Elena checked her watch. Now I have a flight to catch, but you have a decision to make. I looked at her questioningly. This changes things, Hazel. Your life is about to get very different. The question is, who will you share this moment with? As she stood to leave, the answer crystallized in my mind. I knew exactly where I needed to go. I arrived at my parents' house just before 11, clutching the envelope like a shield. The large colonial home looked exactly as it always had. Imposing, perfectly maintained, a physical manifestation of my parents' orderly minds and high standards. Through the window, I could see them in the dining room with Jackson and Audrey probably discussing last night's uncomfortable dinner moment over coffee and pastries. My father was gesturing animatedly, likely explaining something complex, while my mother nodded along. Jackson sat with one arm draped casually around Audrey's chair, the picture of confident brilliance. For a moment, I considered turning around, returning to New York with my victory private and untarnished by their potential dismissal. But Elena's words echoed in my mind. Your application showed a kind of intelligence rarely seen. I deserved this moment. More importantly, I needed them to see that their narrow definition of intelligence had been wrong all along. I walked up the familiar stone path and rang the doorbell, something I'd never done at my own childhood home. My mother answered, surprise evident on her face. Hazel? We thought you'd left already. Come in, we're just having coffee. The conversation died as I entered the dining room. Jackson had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but not enough to offer an apology for last night's comment. I thought you were heading back to New York this morning, my father said clearly, trying to move past the awkwardness. Change of plans, I replied, taking a seat at the table without waiting for an invitation. I placed the envelope in front of me but didn't mention it. About last night, Jackson began, his tone suggesting he was preparing to offer the kind of non-apology I'd received from him throughout our childhood. I spoke out of turn, the wine, you know. Actually, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, I wanted to talk to all of you about something important. My mother immediately looked concerned. Is everything all right? Are you in some kind of trouble? The assumption that any important news from me must be bad news stung, but I pushed forward. For the past 2 years, I've been developing a design application called Prism. It's an adaptive interface that reconfigures itself based on the user's cognitive style, making design tools accessible to people with different learning approaches. My father frowned slightly. That sounds interesting. Jackson's expression was harder to read, a mixture of confusion and something else. Skepticism, perhaps. The core technology, I continued, uses a neural network to analyze how users interact with visual information and then adapts the entire system to match their natural thought patterns. Now Jackson was paying closer attention. That's actually a complex computational problem. How did you approach the adaptive algorithm? Instead of answering, I slid the envelope toward the center of the table. This morning I received this. My mother picked it up, examining the embossed Morningside logo with curiosity. What is it? Open it, I said. She carefully extracted the contents, reading silently for a few moments before her eyes widened. My father leaned over her shoulder, his expression changing from polite interest to shock. First prize, he said, looking up at me, in an international innovation competition. Jackson reached for the papers, scanning them quickly. I watched his face as understanding dawned. This was no minor achievement, no participation ribbon. The Morningside Challenge was prestigious, competitive, and rigorous, and I had won. $1 million in development funding. My mother read aloud, her voice faint with disbelief. Mentorship program, partnership opportunities with adaptive systems. She looked up. Elena Williams personally delivered this? I nodded. She said my approach to the problem showed, and I quote, a kind of intelligence rarely seen in technical submissions. The room fell silent. Jackson was still reading through the documentation, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual confidence. This adaptive interface technology, it's similar to what my research team has been trying to develop. I know, I said quietly. I heard you talking about it last night. He stared at me, realization dawning. You've actually built a working prototype of what we've only theorized. Yes. Without formal training in computational theory or neuroscience. Yes. My father was now reading through the technical overview included in the package, his physics professor's mind processing the implications. This is remarkable, Hazel, he said, genuine amazement in his voice for perhaps the first time in my life. The mathematical approach here is unconventional but elegant. As they passed the papers around, examining different aspects of the award notification and project summary, my phone buzzed with an incoming news alert. The Morningside Challenge had issued a press release announcing the winners, and tech blogs were already picking up the story. I showed the screen to my family. The headline read, Revolutionary Adaptive Design Tool Wins Prestigious Morningside Prize. Could change how we interact with technology. There's going to be a press conference tomorrow, I said, and I'm presenting at the International Design Conference next week. Jackson set down the papers, a complex emotion playing across his face that I couldn't quite identify. Then I realized what it was, the same expression I'd worn countless times throughout our childhood, the look of someone confronting evidence that they might not be the smartest person in the room. I need to see this prototype, he said finally. My team has been stuck on the exact problem you've apparently solved. Before I could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Dr. Winters from the lab, he answered, walking a few steps away from the table. Yes, I'm with my family. Wait, what article? I watched as he pulled up something on his phone, his expression changing from confusion to shock. He looked at me, then back at his phone. Yes, that's my sister, he said into the phone. No, I didn't. I wasn't aware of the extent of… Yes, I understand the implications. When he hung up, his hand was visibly shaking. What is it? Audrey asked. Jackson swallowed hard. That was my research director. The entire lab is reading about PRISM right now. He wants to know why I never mentioned my sister was developing the exact technology we've been trying to create for 2 years. He turned to me, and for the first time since we were very young children, I saw my brother look at me with something like awe. How? He asked simply. How did you solve the cognitive adaptability problem when a team of PhDs couldn't… I thought carefully before answering. Maybe because I needed the solution in a way you didn't. My brain doesn't work like yours, Jackson. It never has. Traditional interfaces are built for minds like yours, linear, logical, sequential. I had to create something different because the existing tools weren't made for people like me. My mother had tears in her eyes. All those years, we thought you were struggling because you couldn't understand, but you were struggling because we couldn't understand you. My father reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture so unexpected that I nearly pulled away. I don't know what to say, Hazel, except that I was wrong. We all were. Jackson was still processing what this meant for his research, for his understanding of me, for the dynamic that had defined our relationship since childhood. I could see the moment when it fully hit him. His entire body seemed to deflate slightly, and his hands trembled again as he set his phone down. I called you the dumb one last night, he said, his voice hollow with regret. And all this time you were solving a problem I couldn't. Intelligence comes in many forms, I said, repeating Elena's words. Mine just wasn't the kind you valued. The words weren't meant to wound, only to state a truth we all needed to acknowledge, but I saw their impact ripple through my family as they faced the uncomfortable reality of how they had misjudged and underestimated me for years. In that moment, looking at their stunned faces, I felt neither triumph nor vindication. Instead, I felt something unexpected: compassion. They had been trapped in their own narrow understanding of intelligence, unable to see the value in different ways of thinking. In some ways, their worldview had been smaller than mine despite, or perhaps because of their academic brilliance. I should call Max, I said, standing up. We have a lot of preparation to do before the press conference. As I walked toward the door, Jackson called after me. Hazel, wait. His voice had lost all its usual confidence and superiority. I'm sorry. Not just for last night, but for everything. I turned back to face my brother, the golden child, the genius, the standard against which I had been measured and found wanting for 29 years. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as superior, not as the enemy, but as someone limited by his own experience and privilege. I know, I said simply. And Jackson, my team could probably use someone with your theoretical background as we develop this further, if you're interested. I left them sitting around the dining table, still processing the revelation that had upended our family's fundamental dynamic. As I stepped out into the bright spring morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Elena. How did it go? I smiled and typed my response. They're finally beginning to see me. 6 months after that life-changing morning in Boston, I stood at the window of our new office space in Manhattan's Flatiron District, watching the city bustle 20 floors below. The space was everything I dreamed of: open and airy, with adjustable lighting, flexible workstations, and design elements that could be reconfigured based on individual preferences. In other words, a physical manifestation of Prism's core philosophy. The development team just pushed the beta to testing, Max said, entering with 2 coffee cups and handing one to me. We're still on track for public release next month. I nodded, turning from the window to survey our growing company. What had started as just Max and me had expanded to a team of 15 developers, designers, accessibility specialists, and cognitive researchers. We'd hired deliberately, seeking out brilliant minds that had been overlooked by traditional institutions. People with dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and other neurological differences that gave them unique perspectives on our mission. Elena called. Max continued. The partnership agreement with Adaptive Systems is ready for final review. She's also asking if you'll keynote their accessibility conference in December. Since winning the Morningside Challenge, I'd become an unexpected spokesperson for neurodiversity in tech. My story, from family disappointment to innovative founder, had resonated with people who'd been similarly underestimated. The speaking invitations had been overwhelming at first, but I was gradually becoming comfortable with this new role. What about the education pilot program? I asked, referring to our initiative to bring Prism to schools for students with learning differences. Fully funded, Max replied with a grin. The foundation grant came through yesterday. We can launch in 20 schools this January. This was the part of our success that meant the most to me, the chance to help young people like my younger self discover their capabilities before years of criticism could convince them they were the dumb one. My relationship with my family had undergone its own transformation in these months. The initial shock of my success had given way to a complex process of reconciliation. My parents, to their credit, had confronted their biases honestly. They'd visited our offices, asked thoughtful questions about Prism, and begun the difficult work of seeing me, truly seeing me, perhaps for the first time. Jackson's journey had been more complicated. His initial amazement had briefly turned to competitive tension when his research team's funding was redirected to collaborate with Prism rather than continue their parallel work. But eventually, his intellectual curiosity won out over his pride. 3 months after the Morningside announcement, he joined our team as a research consultant, focusing on advancing the neural network capabilities of our platform. Our sibling rivalry gradually transformed into a productive professional relationship, with occasional flare-ups of old dynamics that we were both learning to recognize and address. "Your brother sent over the new algorithm this morning," Max mentioned. "It's impressive, speeds up the cognitive style assessment by about 40%. I smiled. He's always been quick. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Jackson's speed-focused mind complemented my pattern recognition abilities. Together, we were creating something neither could have built alone. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder lunch with my mother, who was visiting New York for a literature conference. These meetings had been awkward at first, filled with her apologies and my guarded responses. But gradually, we were building something new. Not erasing the past, but creating a future that acknowledged both the pain and the possibility of change. "I should get going," I told Max. "I promised to show Mom the education interface we're developing." He nodded already, turning his attention back to his laptop. "Oh, and don't forget team dinner tonight to celebrate the beta launch. Jackson and Audrey are flying in." As I gathered my things, I passed by the wall, where we'd framed the original Morningside Challenge announcement, alongside my earliest sketches of Prism. Next to them hung a simple quote I'd chosen for our office: "The problem isn't how your mind works. The problem is that the world wasn't built for minds like yours." Outside, the autumn air was crisp and invigorating. I navigated the busy sidewalks with a confidence that still sometimes surprised me. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Already at the restaurant, so excited to see what you're working on." The message was punctuated with multiple exclamation points. My formerly reserved proper mother, now enthusiastically overcompensating for years of underestimation. It made me smile. As I waited at a crosswalk, I found myself thinking about that critical moment 6 months ago, sitting in a coffee shop when Elena Williams handed me an envelope that changed everything. But the truth was, the envelope hadn't given me value. It had merely revealed the value I always had. My brother's cruel comment, "the dumb one only fit to be a worker," had been the breaking point, the final push I needed to confront the narrative that had shaped my life. And in a strange way, I was grateful for it. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who teach you to believe in yourself despite everything. And that ultimately was the greatest gift my brother unknowingly gave me. The walk sign illuminated, and I moved forward with the crowd, heading toward lunch with my mother, an afternoon of work on a project I loved, and an evening celebrating with a team that valued my unique mind. Ahead lay challenges and opportunities I couldn't yet imagine, but I would face them with a fundamental truth that had taken 29 years to learn: different doesn't mean deficient, and there are many ways to be brilliant. If you've ever been undervalued by those closest to you, I hope my story gives you courage. Sometimes the envelope that changes everything isn't handed to you by a stranger. It's the moment you decide to believe in yourself when no one else does. I'd love to hear your stories of being underestimated in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please subscribe and share with someone who might need to hear that their different mind is their greatest strength. Thank you for walking this path with me today.